Hi, this is Anna Imagination with a Healing Garden, and welcome to Learn the Lingo. I have a few videos down below, and I started this project back when I was in the seventh perspective. I was in the stage where I was realizing there was no communication, there was no vocabulary for what I was seeing and understanding, and it was all emotion. It was all energy, it was all feeling, and I had to use words to interpret what I was seeing. So this is a stage where I realized I had to invent all of this language in order to even communicate with people. And this is a problem that the sixth perspective gets into is as soon as they get into the sixth perspective, the vocabulary starts to go away. And they're trying to communicate and articulate what they see. And so they borrow from the second perspective. I'm going to say that again, six perspectives. Because if you're here, you're most likely a second or a sixth perspective. Six perspectives. The biggest problem you are facing is you are borrowing from the second perspective to try and communicate what you're experiencing. But it's outdated. It's really the wrong thing, but it is the closest tool that you have had. And that's the problem. Second perspective is at a completely different concept, a completely different mindset than you are. What you are experiencing is something different. And all you have to go by is material that's been provided to you from the second perspective. And that's the issue. What the second perspective is doing is there's a lot of people throughout all of history who've gotten to the sixth, seventh, and eighth perspective, and they can feel the electromagnetic field just messing around with their brain and their spinal cord like a cocktail. And you lack the vernacular to say, what the fuck is going on? You know it, you can feel it, and you're going to feel it before you can actually define it. So what I'm doing, this is absolutely a huge part of what I'm doing, is I'm providing definition so that you can go in and you can start pulling from an updated source, the eighth perspective, as opposed to the second perspective, because the second perspective, different mindset, completely different mindset. And you're using the second perspective, which is all you've got until now, to plug in what you're trying to say. So this is a huge, you really need to stop using second perspective because that encompasses the mindset and the psychology of a completely different priority, a completely different mindset. And to borrow from that is to literally borrow their priorities. And that's not going to do you service. It's going to leave you significantly short. So the goal of what I'm doing here is providing you with vocabulary that'll better suit where you are, what's happening to you, where you're going once you're there, what's going on, and then you'll be able to transfer from sixth over to seventh much smoother. Much smoother. And then when you get into the eighth perspective, well, I become obsolete when you get to the eighth because you'll be able to see it all. And then I'll have friends and you can talk to me and I'll be like, yay! I am waiting for that. I'm, which is actually a very selfish. We don't use that term, fourth perspective. I need to change that. It's a very self-driven. Ooh, I like that. Self-driven. It's a very self-driven motive that I have where I'm going, I really want friends. I really want a social circle with eighth perspective thinkers so I can actually have a social circle. Because right now, well, I don't have anyone I can talk to about this stuff. So I talk to you about this stuff. And I've got people going, this is amazing. And I'm like, I know, right? It's awesome. And it's great for sixth and seventh perspectives because now I can start talking to people who understand. But what I'm getting a lot of is a lot of sixth perspectives coming in, and they're pulling from second perspectives and they're interpreting all this stuff from second perspective. And as an eighth perspective, I'm going, wow, we need to talk. So it's like I just finished the Harry Potter series, and I sat down and had lunch with J.K. Rowling on the seven book series, and then she's given me author's insight onto the eighth. That's a really great way of putting it. Author's insight. So I'm walking in with the full 7 books and author's insight, and you're all talking to me, but you've only read the first 2 Harry Potter books. And I'm looking at you going, spoilers. But it's not spoilers. You're at 6th and 7th and 8th perspective now. And all you've got to go on are books 1 and 2. So this is me shoving the entire series to you, going, here's the rest of the books. Enjoy book 3. Let me know when you get to book 4. Here's book 5. I'm sorry. Here's also 7. And then I've concluded the author's insight. Then let's talk. So let's get you first on par with understanding what's going on with you. But in order to do that, you need to understand physics. You need to understand manifestation on a psychological point of view and also a physics point of view. It's fun. And also, we're going to get into philosophy and what the eighth perspective actually looks like, and I'll be breaking it all down for you. So when you get into all of this, yummy, 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 then we can talk. Then we can hang out. Then I can get friends. Then I can sit down and talk to a person like I can talk to them like me. And that's really what I'm craving. That's really what I'm looking for, is that kind of a conversation. And up until this point, I just have a lot of second perspectives, and then we'll get talking, and then they'll take the conversation towards second perspective material, and I'll go, I see. It's great for them, but I want to point out something. Second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth. I am looking at a 6 or 7 perspective gap. And when you communicate between the perspectives, you're only looking between 2 or 3 perspectives. We relate most to people who are within the second and two perspective gaps. So if you're a 6 perspective, you'll get along real well with 7ths and real well with 5ths. If you're a 4th, you'll get really well along with 3rds and 5ths, because that's your sandwich people. That's your sandwich perspective. My sandwich perspective are 9ths and 7ths. I have no one except the Matrix movies, V for Vendetta. That's what I got. I've got the Bible. I've got Moses. Not really. Moses was 4th perspective. So I've got Jesus, and I've got Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand is great. She gets me. I get Tolstoy. Tolstoy gets me. Who else do I got here? So you see where I'm at. I'm at a point where all of my people are dead or inaccessible. So I'm trying to find people who can talk to me from 7th and 9th point of view. And I don't have anyone. I have 6 perspectives, but all of the 6 perspectives who talk to me are coming from the second perspective material. And I'm going, guys, you're at 6 perspective. You really should be reading the 6. You should be at the 6th Harry Potter book right now, but you haven't had access to it. You've been talking from the 2nd book. So it's great. It's great that you've got that, but wait till you get to this perspective. I'm going to give you 8th, 7th, and 6th perspective. Then you'll be able to understand better what you're looking at from second perspective. Then you're going to look at second perspective and go, wow, they're taking it all literal. Everything is metaphor. Because when you are in 8th perspective, my daughter just did this. I just said something to her, but I was talking 8th perspective. And she took my 8th perspective and switched it into a simile. We use similes to try and shorten the perspective gap between everybody. In addition, we use metaphor to try metaphor. Metaphor is perspective talk for when you are trying to communicate with a different perspective. That's it. When you fail to communicate on a literal is only within your perspective. But when you start speaking outside of perspectives, you're using metaphor. It's the only way we can communicate. So we use similes and metaphors in an attempt to communicate outside of our current perspective. Just once, I want to have a literal conversation on the 8th perspective, but I can't because I require 8th perspective people to speak literal to. So if I'm speaking to you, I have to speak in metaphor and simile. It's the only way I can communicate. 7ths can only communicate with 8ths or 6s, but an 8 can only communicate literally with 7s and 9s. I cannot speak literally to anybody right now. It is really lonely. It's really lonely, which is why I'm doing this, is because once you cross over from 6 to 7, you lose everybody because no one is here speaking literally. So if I want to communicate with someone, I have to use simile and metaphor. My full language has to be done metaphorically. I wrote down this title to this video was called Learn the Lingo, which is metaphor for me, but it might be literal to you. It's 4th perspective talk for learning my language so we can communicate. So this purpose of this podcast This particular playlist is literally just me giving you the language so you can now understand how I speak in my perspective, so I can talk to you, literally. So I can finally step into my world, drop my guard, and actually connect with people. Otherwise, I have to speak metaphorically. Now, second perspectives are sitting there taking the Bible literally, but it was written as a metaphor because the eighths were trying to talk to everybody else. So eighths almost always talk in metaphor. It's the only way we're understood because there are so few of us. Sixes, hippies, are starting to get to a point when they can start speaking the language. And I'll tell you, you're there. When you get to, when you're a hippie, you're isolated. And then you find other hippies and you're like, oh my God, my people, you so get my vibe. You so get my vibe. You so get my energy. I'm right there with you. I get it. I'm right there with you. But I'm now an eighth, so I'm starting to feel the gap. I'm starting to lose you. I'm going to cry because it's so lonely. And I'm starting to lose you because I'm an eighth already. And now when I say things like, well, I'm going to go back to this. Now I'm going to step into psychology. When we say things like I love and I hate, that's not what we're saying. What we're actually saying is love is I need to slow down. My mind is faster than my words because the communication barrier again. Give me a minute. It's so lonely. And then you just get to a point where you're excited because you're not lonely anymore and you can finally be understood. So you start talking just because you're so excited that you can be heard finally. I have been living like this all my life. And it's the first time I've been able to connect with people because I can finally talk. I have needed these words all my life. And it's so lonely. When we say I love, we are really saying I align. When we say I hate, we are really saying that does not align with me. That's all. It doesn't mean I don't like it. It means I don't like the feeling. It hurts me because it's not aligned. I have been needing to say those words since I was 4 years old. And then people of the fourth perspective view the term love and hate differently. So when they hear love and hate, they have a different definition. And then they scream at me because I'm using love and hate. And then six perspectives are like, oh, you shouldn't love and hate anybody. I love everybody. No, you don't. Love means align. Hate means not aligned. You're saying you love everybody. No, you don't. What you're trying to say is you are open-minded to all perspectives. That's what you're trying to say. This is walking between all the perspectives. And you're using fourth perspective talk to try and communicate your own perspective ethically, but you can't because you don't have your sixth and seventh and eighth perspective vocabulary. All you've got is the fourth perspective. So the fourth perspective is going, love means this and hate means this. And for the fourth perspective, well, good for them. Yes, for the fourth perspective, that is right. But for the rest of us, they're fucking wrong. So this has been bottled up inside of me since I was 4 years old. And I've just been mute. And I've just been silent. And I have suffered so much perspective abuse. And if you get this, if you're with me, you fucking get it because you suffered too. You're still suffering. So here are the words. Here's what you've been trying to say because that validates you. It confirms you're not fucking crazy. You're not. The fourth perspective only can see the fourth perspective, just like the rest of us. You can only see your perspective. So here are the words. It's aligned to you or it's not. You are looking for your song. because this is a frequency. Physics, music, psychology, philosophy. It's all music. And either you got your song or you don't. Tolkien could see the perspectives. No, he couldn't. He was at seventh perspective. C.S. Lewis was at seventh perspective. This is why I read. These are why I read and love the books of dead men. It's because they could hear my thoughts, because they could see the world I could see. Because when I step into the world of Neil Gaiman, someone's talking to me and I get them. Because when I open my fucking Shakespeare and I read "To thine own self be true," oh, now that I get. Poor Shakespeare. I can't imagine. That was a man who was in the eighth perspective, trapped in the second age. Miguel de Cervantes, Don Quixote de la Mancha. Now, Don Quixote, that man, of all the men I read, of all the books that I read, of all the lines and of all the words, Don Quixote suffered exactly like I did. He saw a world of different perspective. And he said, fuck you all, I'm going to live it. And they called him crazy. And he didn't give a shit. Can you imagine the loneliness? When you are in your own perspective and there's no one else around you. And you just got second perspectives and third perspectives and fourth perspectives. And Miguel de Cervantes had to sit for 20 years in a prison with just his mind, his perspective, and a book. I cannot imagine his suffering. And at the same time, I lived his suffering. I get it. So when I read the words of Miguel de Cervantes, I wrote the words. Do I have it there? Just give me a minute. This is my baby. Oh, I have not read this since my eighth perspective. When life itself seems lunatic, who knows where madness lies? Perhaps to be practical is madness. To surrender dreams, this may be madness. Too much sanity may be madness. And maddest of all, to see life as it is and not as it should be. Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes. When I read those words, I was understood. Somebody took those words from my brain and put them in a book 500 years ago. I fell in love with Miguel de Cervantes that day. So I'm going to translate this for you from the eighth perspective. When life itself seems insane because you are forced to live a perspective that is not your own, then who knows where insanity is? Perhaps to be practical, to live within the confines of a perspective that is not your own is madness. To surrender dreams, this is madness. To surrender who you are, to surrender your own perspective, This is madness. Too much fourth perspective, too much sanity, too much of someone else's perspective. That may be madness, but the maddest of all is to be forced to see life how others tell you to see it instead of how you see it. Those words, 100%, is Miguel de Cervantes from a prison in the 1500s, crying out using the voice of Don Quixote to say, I see things that no one else sees, and I am alone, and it's fucking insane. Miguel de Cervantes was an eighth perspective. So welcome to Learn the Lingo, which is fourth perspective talk and my metaphor for welcome to the eighth perspective. Here you are going to learn the language to bridge the gap between all of the perspectives so that you can communicate with all of us. My goal is to provide the world with a language that is universal for all the perspectives to communicate. That way, we're not all speaking as the fourth perspective or of the sixth perspective. My goal is to provide you and all of us with a universal perspective language. That is my mission. That is what I'm doing here. Because when we start breaking down communication barriers and we start speaking with one perspective language again, we did this once before. Now we can start talking again. So, welcome to the classroom of the universal language of all the perspectives. Welcome.